Welcome to this session again on teacher and teaching in higher education. Today in this session I am going to talk about the role, responsibilities and competencies required in the teacher. Let me begin with the famous quote about teachers. A mediocre teacher tells, a good teacher explains, a superior teacher demonstrates, and a great teacher inspires. So, after completing this session, you will be able to state the different roles of a teacher in higher education, explain the competencies required in a teacher in higher education, describe the vision envisaged in the draft of the National Policy on Education 2019 for teachers in higher education, realize the different areas they need to work upon for preparing themselves for the roles, shoulder responsibilities and develop competencies for becoming effective teachers. The various roles of a teacher. The first and the foremost role of a teacher is of a facilitator. Everybody will agree today that students come with a great amount of learning when they enter the classrooms. As teachers, we need to facilitate their learning process. Another important role of a teacher is of a creator. The teacher has to create learning experiences, various kinds of assessments, so that better learning occurs among the children. He has to also be a guide in making the students realize what is right and what is wrong, and how the learning can become more effective. A role which a teacher has to emphasize today is of being a mentor. He needs to continuously mentor the students so that they are focused on the task and are not deviated from their learning goals. He also needs to look at how good they are adjusting with the situations. He has to be an evaluator. So, he has to be just and fair and evaluate every learner as per their capacities and abilities. A teacher has to be a lifelong learner because with the changing situations, there are changes in the way teaching learning process has to be done, and hence he has to remain updated with the latest happenings in his field of teaching. He has to be a researcher, constantly keep on researching new ideas in his discipline and the new methodologies which are being followed in his discipline. He also has to focus on a variety of aspects while teaching. The first being the content knowledge. A teacher has to be thorough with the content which he has to teach with respect to his discipline. For this, he needs to make use of the different learning sources which are available to him. In this age of the net, where the knowledge has to be derived and can be derived easily by the students using the various social media, he has to focus on what is correct, what is appropriate and what is suitable for his learners. The other important aspect which he has to emphasize on are the methods which he is using, because learning can be effective only if the students in the classroom remain active participants. The teacher needs to identify which methods would be suitable in his classroom so that the students remain active and involved. And for this, he needs to have the knowledge of the psychology of the learner. He needs to understand the background from which his students have come, the languages which they are speaking, the socio-cultural differences among them, the intellectual differences among them, their interests, their abilities, their attitudes, and then decide and plan the learning experiences which he expects to give in the classroom. And to make these learning experiences effective, he needs to have a great communication ability. For this, he can make use of the technology very effectively. Besides all these, there are certain individual or personal characteristics of a teacher which are very important. A teacher has to be approachable. A teacher has to be patient. A teacher has to be a good listener. A teacher has to be a friend, a philosopher, and a guide for his students. So, the various competencies which are required in the context of learning in the teacher are, the first one being, he needs to encourage the contacts between students and faculty. This means that he needs to foster interactions among students, and he also needs to interact with the students, because it is through interaction that we learn better. This also helps to develop a cooperation among the students, so that learning becomes easier and enjoyable, and not merely a race to achieve individual goals only. He should also use active learning techniques so that all the students can be involved in the process of learning. An important competency in the teacher is giving prompt feedback, because this reinforcement is going to be very important for the further learning of the students. Also, he needs to emphasize time on task. He should make the students realize the relevance of time in the process of learning. A teacher should communicate high expectations to the students, because the high expectations you set, the better the students will perform. And for achieving these expectations, he should respect the diverse talents amongst the students and their ways of learning. So, he needs to realize that there is not just one way of learning, but students can learn in a variety of ways. Hence, he needs to develop his learning experiences in such a manner that all these diverse talents and ways of learning are catered to. Now, let us look at the competencies required in the context of teaching. The first one is that the teacher involves acquiring relevant knowledge about students and using that knowledge to inform the course design and plan classroom teaching. The second one involves aligning the three major components of instruction: the learning objectives, the assessments, and the instructional activities. It also involves articulating explicit expectations regarding learning outcomes and policies. Involves prioritizing the knowledge and skills that are to be focused upon. It involves recognizing and overcoming one's own blind spots. It involves adopting appropriate teaching roles to support the learning goals. It involves progressively refining the courses based on reflection and feedback. Let us look at the draft of the National Policy on Education 2019 in the context of the faculty in higher education. They have recommended orientation programs for the new faculty, induction programs to orient regarding the contemporary pedagogic practices and learning resources, national programs for professional development of faculty, and an important recommendation is mentoring by the senior faculty. The various areas of inputs which are emphasized by the National Policy on Education 2019 are the structure and content of the disciplines of the faculty, the designing of units and lesson plans, selecting and organizing the content and the learning experiences, catering to individual learner needs and address diversity in the classroom and designing inclusive pedagogies, incorporating technology in teaching, team teaching and credible assessments. Thus, we can understand that the draft focuses on the abilities of the teacher right from designing of the curriculum to an effective assessment and credible assessment system in the entire teaching learning process in higher education. I would say that effective teachers need to be fair, have a positive attitude, should be well prepared, should be knowledgeable, should always give a personal touch to their teaching, should of course have a sense of humor, should be creative, should be forgiving, should be a validator of information in this age of the internet, where information is easily and readily available to the students. A teacher should be ready to admit mistakes, give respect to the students, should be compassionate, should give a sense of belongingness, should set high expectations, should remain a lifelong learner, should be willing to go an extra mile and should be techno savvy. Let me conclude with what I imagine a teacher should be. Students must be taught how to think, not what to think. If a teacher works along these lines, I think we would be satisfying the vision envisaged in the National Policy of Education 2019. Thank you.